Since the formation of the Jedi Order, the Jedi Code has evolved in its wording, but one constant was its stance on attachments. The first tenet in the modernized Jedi Code, which was written in canon by Jedi Master Odan, says that there is no emotion, only peace. This derives from the philosophy of the ancient Tython Jedi, who after discovering and mastering the Force, would also find a connection between emotions and their power. Whilst these Jedi did not ban attachments, the Jedi heavily discouraged them, as the emotions of relationships would affect their thinking, and over time the Jedi developed into a monastical order. But this habit blurred the line between compassion and personal obsession, and the third tenet of the code, there is no passion, there is serenity, placed a number of Jedi in confusing dilemmas. Jedi were faced with the impossible task of ensuring all relationships were seen through a lens of purity. After the Ruusan reformations, the habits established by the ancient Jedi were set into stone, and Jedi were ordered to talk to their master if they ever felt the urge to act on their attachments. But what if the Jedi had allowed attachments? What effect will this have on the galaxy? The story begins in the aftermath of the Great Hyperspace War. Whilst the Jedi had previously been informal in their structure, with Padawans only being tied to the Order until they became a knight, the war had brought changes to their order. On the planet of Ossus, Odan was fulfilling his master's wish to construct a repository, and he had been studying the Jedi Code when he started to wonder if Padawans really knew the code. Odan was still struggling after the death of his master Uru, and as he tried to release his emotions into the Force, he realised that one of the reasons for the upsurge in Sith in the war had been the freedom given to knights, and the rule of attachment was a point of contention. After discussing this code change with the remaining masters, the Jedi decided to gradually implement the changes. Before establishing attachments within the Order, they first allowed Jedi to occasionally visit their families, and once they discovered the less Jedi left the Order, they allowed relationships amongst Jedi. Odan was insistent that meditation was strictly implemented, as this would prevent any acts against the will of the Force, and all marriages would first be approved by the Jedi Council. Over the next 600 years, Odan would teach this new Jedi Code to all students, but whilst the Jedi had eliminated the conflict of interest concerning attachments, they could not stop the quest for power. Whilst Odan was studying in the Hall of Antiquities, he would learn of a Jedi under Master Tremaine by the name of Freedon Nad. Whilst Nad had been incredibly gifted in the Force, his desire for power was surrounded by emotions of darkness, and he ultimately slayed his master with his anger. Although Nad's physical body was eventually defeated, the real test for Odan and his code would occur 400 years after Nad's reign of tyranny on Onderon. When the Jedi battled the Krath in the Great Sith War, another Jedi Exar Kun would follow the path of Freedon Nad in his own search for the Sith's secrets. But in the aftermath of the Battle of Deniba, the code had allowed a relationship between Nomi Sunrise and Ulic Qel-Droma, so despite the death of his master, Qel-Droma is convinced to not infiltrate the Krath. During Exar Kun's search for more power, he would venture to Yavin 4 and earn the servitude of the Massassi, but in his efforts to squash any dark side threats, he would kill Sith sorceress Alima Keto in a rage. This left the former Jedi without any allies, and he would have to bide his time and gather more power until he had a Shadow Hand with whom he could fulfill an ancient Sith prophecy. Without Qel-Droma, the Jedi had no inside knowledge of the Krath, and with Exar Kun's discovery of the Dark Reaper, the Sith starts to conquer worlds by draining their life force. The Jedi are forced into retreat on Ossus until an unlikely ally offers them assistance. The Mandalorian Crusaders under Mandalore the Indomitable had been looking for a worthy enemy, and they heard that Exar Kun was also looking to expand his portfolio of planets. The Mandalorians had thought that Yavin 4 was weak, with Exar Kun often venturing to other worlds, and the Crusaders caused such damage on the planet, Exar Kun offered them to be an ally. Whilst Mandalore the Indomitable was impressed by the Sith's power, the sight of the Golden Globe, which Exar Kun used to house his Massassi slaves, was beneath the honour of the Crusaders. The battle on Yavin 4 had caught the attention of Republic forces near the sector, and the Jedi saw an opportunity to find the secret of the Dark Reaper. Led by Jedi Masters Son and Sunrider, the Jedi successfully overwhelmed the Sith with their sheer number of Jedi Knights, and they disabled the Dark Reaper by dismantling its energy source known as a Force Harvester. With the Sith threat nullified, the Republic decided to decimate the Krath forces, which had been under Exar Kun's control, and under Nomi Sunrider, the Jedi entered a time of peace. With the Republic and the Mandalorians retaining a tense but cordial standing, the Jedi Order begins to flourish, and the schemes of Darth Vishya would have to wait, as Revan and Malak became Jedi Masters. The hidden group of Sith known as the Dark Council would continue to lurk in the shadows. On the orders of the Emperor, the Sith were summoned to the world of Dromund Kaas, and they would be ordered to find the dormant Rakatan Starforge. As Vishya had anticipated, the Republic are placed on high alert and sent some of their most esteemed Jedi, such as Revan Bastila Malak and Mitra Surik. The Emperor used his immense power in the Force to dominate the minds of the Jedi, and soon he attempted to turn the Jedi against their superiors on Ossus. Vishya attempted to separate the Jedi across the galaxy, also in pursuit of knowledge, but what he had thought was a weakness in the changed Jedi Code was a strength between Revan and Bastila. The Force bond established by the two Jedi allowed them to draw from the strength of each other, and together they broke free of the control of the Emperor. The Jedi on Ossus are warned about the Emperor's plans, and Jedi reinforcements led by Master Vandal Takare would battle the fleet of the Starforge over Ossus. Since the Jedi's first attempt to destroy the Starforge, the Order had been conflicted on how they had reacted to the threat. Divided into two factions, the liberal Kreia led the more modern Jedi, whilst Master Rook led the traditional Jedi, and as the Sith fleet approached, the fractures turned into a split. Kreia decided to be proactive, and using a number of Republic Hammerhead-class cruisers, she led an assault, whilst Rook and his Jedi stayed on Ossus, waiting for the Sith to arrive on their territory. This would be the final mistake made by Rook and his Jedi. The Emperor projected the spirit of his body from Dromund Kaas to Ossus, and tore through the entire planet by possessing every being, leaving Rook's Jedi as stone statues, and the exterior of the planet was covered in a thin layer of dust. Whilst the remaining Jedi had the advantage of Bastila's battle meditation, Kreia spotted the shatter point in the battle, which emanated from Ossus, and ordered a full-scale retreat. As the shatter point left Ossus, the Jedi gathered the knowledge guarded by their now frozen allies, and they escaped just before the full might of the Sith Empire arrived. Whilst the bond between Revan and Bastila had saved some Jedi, these bonds were an exception, as the Jedi had started to deviate back towards the ancient code, and now they had suffered the price. With the efforts of Jedi scouts before the battle, the remaining Jedi had found a path to the previously abandoned Tython, and under Revan and Bastila, a new Jedi Order was going to emerge. As the Jedi silently began their process of revival, Darth Vishya was making full use of the Starforge's capabilities. The Sith Emperor decided to spread his consciousness to various bodies, and now he could further the pursuit of his quest for immortality. Whilst he had already conducted a ritual in Nathema that enabled him to transfer consciousness, he wanted something more permanent, and one which could eliminate all life in the galaxy, including the renegade Jedi. Vishya would discover the world of Zakul on his quest, and hearing rumours of an eternal fleet, he decided to embody the warrior Valkorion. After convincing the tribes of Zakul that he was the subject of a prophecy, Valkorion invaded the mind of the Zakul inhabitants, and they guided him to the sleeping Eternal Fleet. Consisting of warships half a kilometre in length, the fleet was the fastest in the galaxy, and Valkorion took advantage of their cloaking devices to blitz any Republic or Rogue Sith forces. The galaxy was being manipulated by Vishya to feed his power, and they were begging for the now mystical Jedi to protect them. In the years after their humiliating defeat on Ossus, Revan and Bastila had set about repairing the implosion of the Jedi Order, and finding a way to put an end to the Emperor's reign of tyranny. Whilst they trained the next generation of Jedi, using the code of Odan-Ur, Kreia was working on finding more information about Vishya to the Starforge. The Jedi Master had cleverly infiltrated the Sith Empire by pretending to be a trader for dark side artifacts, and she soon had knowledge of discontent amongst the Dark Council. Kreia was able to prey on the ambitions of Darth Nihilus, and upon discovering her plans to overthrow the Emperor, Kreia pretended to be a powerful, mysterious ally. The Jedi Council on Tython received all the intelligence gathered by Kreia, and they were extremely concerned about the rumours of a fleet more potent than the Starforge, so their time of waiting had met a premature end. The Jedi had the services of another important ally in Lord Scourge, who had served as the Emperor's wrath, but with Nihilus and Kreia, and visions of Jedi success, the Jedi had seen the Emperor in a different light. Scourge willingly gave the coordinates of the hidden Starforge to the Jedi, and this allowed Revan and Bastilla's forces to bypass the hyperspace lanes controlled by the Sith Empire. With the element of surprise on this occasion, the path to the Starforge is seemingly unguarded, and the Grand Masters lead a team of Jedi to capture one of the Empire's biggest weapons. Having already advanced on the previous Starforge by providing a propulsion system to move it across the galaxy, the Emperor made upgrades to his disruptor fields, and it could now leech energy from any world within its vicinity. All this knowledge was with the Jedi thanks to Krea's efforts, and Malak led a team to destroy the controls, allowing the Jedi to access the first deck of the Starforge by flying through the gap between the fins. Once the Jedi landed, they were in shock. All around them were Jedi suspended in stasis in hermetically sealed pods, most barely alive and surrounded by an aura of darkness. As half the Jedi searched for a way to release the prisoners, Revan and Bastila were led by Darth Nihilus, who had obtained the schematics of the shipyard. The Jedi posed as prisoners as they travelled through the command centre and ascended to the viewing platform, where they hoped to deactivate the Starforge. When they stepped into the throne room, the Jedi realised that their easy journey was too good to be true. The intimidating silhouette of Valkorion stepped slowly out of the shadows, barely registering the intent of the Jedi, and in a monotone voice, he told the Jedi he would be victorious again. The hands of the Jedi barely touched their lightsabers, before Valkorion called down a purple wave of Force lightning, which the Jedi struggled to repel with their Tutaminis. As the Jedi staggered to their feet, Valkorion calmly walked to a control panel on the upper level and opened more stasis pods containing Jedi Masters. Revan and Bastila looked around to see familiar faces looking lifeless, and Valkorion soon reached out to drain their life force. The eyes of the Sith glowed with a dark red hue, and the dark side energy travelled to his arms and fingers as the Jedi desperately rolled for cover. Through the broken windows, the Jedi saw the Eternal Fleet was moving to trap them, and Revan knew the Bastila was now needed for a battle meditation. As Bastila ran to the level below, Revan ignited his two lightsabers and closed the gap to Valkorion to prevent the Sith using the Force, plunging the blades through his chest. To Revan's annoyance, the Sith he had stabbed was merely an illusion, and now he was surrounded by copies of Valkorion. All of the Sith raised their hands in sync, preparing to torture Revan's mind, but drawing on the bond with Bastila, he enhanced his ability of Force Sense and leapt to the Valkorion standing higher than everyone else. Revan knew he had found the real Valkorion when the illusions disappeared, and the Jedi's feet were slowly creeping backwards as he strained against the purple lightning attack. Unnoticed by the two combatants, the door to the room blasted open and in walked Krea. The Jedi Master ignited her 3 blades and swirled them around her at immense speed, before twisting them like a corkscrew into the Emperor. As Valkorion's body started to decay and dark side energy seeped out of his body, the room around them echoed with a voice that was not Valkorion's, and they knew the real Emperor was yet to be vanquished. Republic troops soon entered the room and set charges across the Starforge, as the Republic fleet were holding their own, with the help of Bastila demoralising the Eternal Fleet. Revan leads the escape in the Ebon Hawk, leaving the trailing embers of the Starforge behind them, and with one of the Sith's weapons destroyed, the Jedi returned to Tython. The battle had crippled the Jedi, and this was something that heavily affected Revan, so much so that Revan reduced his role in the Order, and he decided to hand control to Mitra Surik. The new Grand Master continued the work of her mentor, as she implemented focused lessons on Force bonds, and it made it easier for the Jedi to find potential Force sensitives. As ever with the Jedi Code, not everyone saw Surik's modifications as a positive step. The Jedi Master Darth Nala was amongst those who thought the Jedi needed to be more ruthless against the Sith, instead of waiting for Vishya to make his move, and she was one of many to abuse the code, as she started to manipulate high-ranking Republic politicians and officers. The Republic had yet to recover from the economic impact of Vishya's attacks, but with the manipulation of these rogue Jedi, the Chancellor decided that they couldn't ignore the threat of the Sith Empire. Despite the protests of the Jedi Council, and many of those in the Senate, that the Republic was in no position to compete with the Eternal Fleet, the result is a full-scale war, on an even greater scale than before, and the emergence of more Sith. The rise of another war caused more unrest amongst the Jedi, and with Jedi temples being constructed on worlds such as Coruscant and Ilum, The Jedi were once more being split into various factions. The Jedi had different ideas on how to tackle the war, and they were divided between serving the Republic on the battlefield and protecting their families. Like the war over Ossus, the Emperor, even in his relative solitude on Dromund Kaas, was still influencing much of the galaxy's events as he healed in his stasis. The Sith had been deceived by Darth Nihilus and Lord Scourge, and whilst he wanted them terminated for their betrayal, his priorities were on a much grander scale. The loss of the Starforge and losses in the Eternal Fleet were unfortunate, as he had planned for a swift annihilation of the galaxy, but the Sith could wait. In his absence, the Dark Council had become fractured, and Sith started to separate and look to be the one to usurp the Emperor. As Jedi and Sith destroyed each other in isolated battles, there were two Sith who stood out through the fog of chaos, and these were Darth Vindican and his apprentice Veridon, now known as Malgus. The two Sith took advantage of the widespread discontent created by war, and instead of annihilating worlds like Vitiate, they started to convert alien species into warriors of the Sith using the multilingual Malgus. The Emperor could sense the power and efficiency of Malgus, and thought the Sith could make for a useful tool, and with his recovering powers, he guided them to a number of superweapons, which his scientists had been crafting in secrecy. The first of these destructive devices was the Sunraiser designed by Darth Malgus, which, like the Starforge, had the capability to produce a variety of ships. Vindican and Malgus decided to eliminate some of their Sith competition, such as Darth Angral and Darth Venomel, who they believed were threats, and could compromise the Sith's domination. As the two Siths started to assert some of their dominance over the other candidates to the throne, their next task was to destroy the Republic and the scattered Jedi. With the effectiveness of the superweapon project, the two Sith decided to infiltrate the Republic's own version, and capture the renowned scientist Nasan Godera, who had been on the radar of Darth Angral. The acquisition of their most esteemed scientist caused great concern amongst the Republic, and whilst the Jedi had been divided, the situation forced them to work together again. Led by the more combat-orientated Venzalo, the Jedi discovered on the temple on Coruscant that the exiled Revan had created a holocron with knowledge of a counter to the Sith's armory. The former Jedi Master discovered a Rakatan facility similar to the Starforge called the Foundry, and away from the Emperor, the Jedi of the present were able to mine ores and resources and close the deficit to the Empire's vast fleet. Whilst they built their fleet, Jedi Master Zim led a separate division of Jedi to find weaknesses in the Sith, and they found Malgus had an attachment to the Twi'lek Alina Daru. With the Force techniques taught under Mitra Surik's code, the Jedi connect with Daru and discover a belief that Malgus could be converted to the light. Having examined some of the Sith Empire's files on Malgus, the Jedi had seen that the Sith had been exposed to the dark side since his childhood at the Dromund Kaas Sith Academy. Combined with the influence of the determined Darth Vindican, it seemed that the only indication of a redemption was his defiance of the Empire's anti-alien policy. The Jedi Masters were now playing a dangerous waiting game with the Sith. After a period of inactivity from the Sith, it was Fleet Admiral Oteg who first made contact with the Sith, but it was not the Sith they were expecting. Amidst the chaos amongst the Dark Council, Darth Varaun had emerged with his own plan, gathering a group of soldiers known as the Armageddon Battalion. Having used the Discord to defeat Darth Barriss, Varaun realised his age restricted him from defeating the Emperor and his subordinates in combat, so he decided to search for Jedi help. When Oteg relayed Varaun's offer to the other Jedi, they were unsurprisingly suspicious, but they knew that Varaun would lead them to Vindican and Malgus. The Jedi chose to accept a tenuous alliance, and as they had expected, he asks the Jedi for some of their resources. With the Jedi controlling the Foundry, they donate some of their older Republic ships to help Varaun, and in exchange, he guided them through the Stygian Caldera, which was a notorious nebula controlled by the Sith Empire. When the Jedi entered the airspace above Dromund Kaas, Varaun diverted his fleet to one of the moons of Dromund Kaas, as the Jedi were met by the full might of Vindican and Malgus' fleet. Before some of the Sith's superweapons could charge up, the Jedi sprung into action, using their small and agile starfighters to weave through the turret fire of the capital ship, and fired their own shot at the Desolator. Combining the planet prison, Deathmark laser and shock drum, Vindican had taken control of a dreadnought housed as a superweapon, and initiating phase 1 of his attack, he trapped the first wave of Jedi starfighters in an ionic atmospheric bubble. Admiral Otek stared in horror as the corpses of Jedi pilots hovered in the air, but it was too late for a retreat. The Jedi were now trapped by the incoming Eternal fleet of Darth Malgus, so Otek decided the Jedi had to attack the flagship of Vindican. The Jedi positioned their Hammerhead-class cruisers perpendicular to the flagship and fired into the side of the ship. This forced Vindican to divert energy away from the Desolator, and as Jedi reinforcements finally arrived, Otek's aggression provided an escape through to Dromund Kaas. Many pilots were sacrificed to create a path for the other Jedi, and led by Zalo and Zim, the surviving Jedi feel the tendrils of darkness through their spines as they descended through to the surface. The anti-aircraft missiles in the jungle terrain made landings difficult, and the Jedi ultimately crashed in the swamps. As the searchlights of the Sith ground forces drew closer, the Jedi saw a Fury-class Imperial interceptor of the Sith fly over their heads, and the Jedi followed them to Kaas City. When they reached the shadow of the Imperial Citadel, the Jedi were blown away by a sudden storm as the ghost of Sith Lord Kalig had awoken. The former enemy of Tulak Horde blocked the trespassers from the temple, and as he began to summon other spirits, Zalo ordered for a retreat. Instead of approaching the temple from the base of the valley, the Jedi leapt onto the incoming Jedi starfighters, and once above the temple's perimeter, they jumped to fight the guards and the dark side warriors. The sheer number of Jedi were able to overwhelm the trained Sith, but as they walked through the scary statues and towering pillars, they stopped in their tracks. The awoken Darth Vishya was teamed with a squad of Imperial guards, and without any emotion, he blasted Zalo and any other Jedi in the vicinity. As the surviving Jedi staggered back to the entrance, Vishya followed them outside and called upon the skies to summon a swirling storm, burying the Jedi several feet below ground. Vindican and Malgus soon arrived from their fleet and bowed to the Emperor, who ordered them to destroy the survivors. Igniting their weapons, the two Sith cut through the helpless Jedi when they looked to see a blinding light from above. In the space over Dromund Kaas, Darth Varon had repaired the damaged Desolator, and after ionizing the atmosphere, the Sith used a shock drum, and the planet started to split into pieces. As Varon watched the downfall of his rival Jedi and Sith, he was impaled by a blue lightsaber. The Sith's body dropped to the floor, and behind him stood Satele Shan, born from the code of her ancestors, and perhaps the final hope. During the Jedi's war with the Sith, Satele Shan had been raised by Tassiel Shan, and like her ancestors, she had been taught the code of Odan-Ur. As Tassiel continued to reject the Jedi's request for an induction, Satele would show aptitude in the ability of foresight, and she saw a great abyss in the Force. As Tassiel inscribed her learnings for future generations, their exile was soon interrupted by the Sith Empire, as they tried to control the hyperspace lanes, and in the melee, Satele and Tassiel were separated, but not before Satele was ordered to leave the planet. The Jedi was equipped with several generations of knowledge, and leaving the planet in an Imperial starfighter, she overheard the Imperial chatter discussing movements over Dromund Kaas. Having learned about the planet as synonymous with the Sith, Satele started to believe that her vision was about to become reality, but when she followed the path of the other Jedi, her expectations of a full-blown war was met by embers and a great wound in the Force. Amidst a field of death and destruction, a singular set of lights glowed from the flagship of the Sith, so Satele traversed the debris to enter the exposed hangar. With alarms flaring through the ship, initiated by the death of their leader, Satele breezes past the Imperial soldiers and guardsmen and descended to the bridge. Satele could sense the darkness from Varon, but also his overconfidence, and she stabbed a Sith in his back before he could even turn. The Jedi was surprised to see acceptance instead of denial, and when the Sith let out a final exhalation, she could only hear the distinct humming of the electrical motors. The Jedi tried to search for any potential surviving allies, and after failing to contact any ship in the battle or the ground, their silence was broken by incoming Republic reinforcements. While Satele had little to no involvement in the battle, when the Chancellor heard of her survival, the Jedi had accidentally become a part of a propaganda project. Despite a major victory for the Galactic Republic, the remains of the Sith Empire were bigger than the Republic, so they needed the support of the rest of the galaxy. The last Jedi's years of exile and hiding had made her reluctant to be involved in politics, but if she were to rebuild the Jedi, she could not go alone. After meeting with the Chancellor on Coruscant, the de facto Grand Master of the Jedi decided to use the planet as the Jedi base instead of Tython, so it was more accessible to potential students. With the knowledge collected from Tassio and Revan, Satele formulates her own Jedi code, which was similar to the one of Odan-Ur. With none of the other older Jedi restricting the growth of the Order, the Jedi entered into their greatest era, and free of any significant Sith activity, the Order expanded beyond the walls of Coruscant. Over the next 1500 years, some of the old mystique of the Jedi was replaced by widespread support, and the Order established beacons across the galaxy to symbolise their authority. Even with the Jedi becoming more open-minded, this did not prevent Jedi Master Thanius from leaving the Order and eventually reviving the Sith. The warning of the threat of the Sith was a shock to the Jedi, but many of the Jedi had no intentions of leaving the Order, and it was only a select group of pure-blood Sith on Korriban who continued the legacy of their ancient predecessors. After a further 500 years of disorganised Sith, who were either picked off by Jedi or were destroyed fighting each other for supremacy, the Jedi encountered a young man from Apatros. The man born as Dessel but given the name Bane made the Republic soldiers victims of his deception as he used the Force to manipulate them in card games. At the age of 18, Bane would have normally been too old to be considered for training, but such was his high midichlorian count, and the darkness and ambition the Council could sense in Bane, he was too dangerous to be left in the open without training. Having witnessed the loss of Thanius 500 years earlier, the Jedi were more open to the views of Bane, and everyone believed he was destined to be a great Jedi, with some considering him to be the chosen one, given his lack of connection to his father. What the Jedi had underestimated, though, was the effect of Bane's abuse-ridden childhood and his desire to achieve greatness. Bane would often be seen in the Jedi archives, hiding from his superiors that he was searching for those who sought power, and he would learn of Darth Ruin's attempts to try and revive the Sith. Bane saw flaws in the Sith's plan to defeat the Jedi, and believed their quest for individual power had been hindering their bigger goal of defeating the Jedi. Whilst the Jedi initially tried to accept some of Bane's radical views, Bane was slowly drifting apart from the others, and he would often be provided with missions on distant worlds. But for all the Jedi who alienated Bane after he became a knight, there was one Jedi who saw greatness. The Jedi Master Skir Khan had sensed the Jedi were growing predictable and too close to the Senate, so he grew closer to Bane. Khan served as an informal master to Bane, with the Council hoping this last resort could bring the rogue Jedi back to their side. The Council's wishes were initially met with success. With Khan's abilities in battle meditation, the two Jedi formed an unusual force bond, but for Bane, this was a stepping stone to greatness. The two Jedi quietly left the Order to no one's notice, as the Council's patience and reasoning for keeping them had grown weary, but soon the rogue Jedi started to fall out. Bane didn't agree with Khan's idea that they should gather the hidden Sith, as he believed that to manipulate the weak was not a worthy demonstration of power. Khan now felt Bane would be a threat that far eclipsed the Jedi, so he cleverly guided the former knight to Korriban under the pretense of finding a suitable apprentice. Once the two Jedi arrived to the Valley of the Dark Lords, Khan turned to face Bane, and raising his arms aloft, he summoned his army of hidden Sith. Legions of Sith rose from crevices disguised as archaeological sites, and moved to trap Bane, so he leapt onto the lower level of the tomb of Marka Ragnos. Bane's eyes glowed a sickly yellow for the first time, as he felt a great darkness building within him from Khan's betrayal. Calling upon this new surge of power, Bane reached to the skies, and he started to drain the lives of the Sith around him. The army of Sith slowed to a standstill as they grasped their heads in pain, but Bane was also crippled by his yet-to-be mastered powers, until they all looked overhead and saw the Republic fleet had arrived. The Jedi had been alerted by the Republic soldiers on Korriban, and the flamboyant Jedi Master Farfalla arrived to prevent the Sith rebellion. But if the Jedi thought this was similar to the other Sith legions, they were severely mistaken. With Bane exhausted from his attack, Khan summoned students from the old Sith Academy, but the fleet had no regard for the ancient tombs, and scattered cannon fire across the valley. Khan guided his army below ground, but Bane moved into the network of tombs when he heard a voice. Bane was drawn into the tomb of Zozan, whose spirit had been waiting in a holocron for thousands of years. As the Republic began to take over the valley, Bane finally committed himself to the dark side, and pledged to learn from the ancient Sith. The new master and apprentice were hidden from the Jedi when the Republic completed their victory over Khan's Sith rebellion, and without knowledge of time passing in the outside world, Bane indulged himself into Sith archives. After several decades of learning, Zozana completed the training of Bane, and for a final act as a spirit, she suspended her apprentice in stasis through a dark side ritual, waiting for the time to be awoken. In the aftermath of the battle on Korriban, the disappearance of Bane was a footnote in the Jedi Council's report. With both the Jedi and the Republic eager to move past this incident, over the next millennium, Bane was almost forgotten altogether, with most Jedi speculating that he had been consumed by the Sith spirits in the valley. The Sith themselves were reduced to cults before Khan's rebellion, with the Jedi barely considering those, such as the sorcerers on the world of Tund, as a threat. Initially under Grandmaster Faye Kovan, the Jedi reverted to the code laid out by Satele Shan, but now employed stricter tests through a Jedi's time of service, to prevent any defections such as those of Khan and Bane. The Jedi were also now directly tied to the Republic, by being reformed under the branch of the Republic Army, but as the Jedi rapidly expanded, the development of the Republic Army slowed down, and greedy businesses became the biggest enemy. Even the growing Jedi didn't have the capacity to control these commercial planets, with corporations producing droids to defend their planet. The Jedi were hesitant to intervene, as they didn't want to upset those in the Senate, but many in the Order didn't agree, as they thought the Jedi were allowing corruption to leak into the Republic. By the time Yoda became a Jedi Grand Master, the Order was suffering from more defections than it had in its history, and they rebelled against the Jedi's policy by protecting civilians on other worlds from corruption. But soon the intergalactic banking clan started to extend its influence, and whilst they appeared to be neutral, they were clouded by the dark side. Having helped to supply Lord Khan's failed rebellion several centuries earlier, the IGBC had grown even stronger, with their partnership with the Damask Holdings, and on the world of Maigito, the newest Damask would add to their darkness. Ego Damask II would show signs of Force sensitivity at a young age, and the ambitions of Card Damask would spread to his son, as this soon turned to darkness. The IGBC and the other Damasks turned a blind eye to Higo's darkness, other than ordering him to study it in secrecy, and Higo's curiosity led him to study the Sith and their history. This inevitably led him to uncover what the Jedi tried to hide, and the conflicting reports of the downfall of Lord Khan's army made Higo travel to Korriban. Whilst the Republic and the Jedi had once guarded the planet, the Millennists found the planet deserted as all the treasure from the tombs had been excavated, but Higo still felt the call of the darkness. As he used what he knew of the Force to shift the rubble that had been caved in, he didn't know that he was following in the footsteps of another ambitious Sith several hundred years earlier. Unperturbed by the dangers of the tombs, Damask eventually entered into a chamber, and trusting his instincts, he awoke the frozen body of Darth Bane. After several hundred years of stasis, Bane initially found himself disorientated, before remembering the mission given to him by his master. The Sith Lord focused his eyes onto Damask, and could feel the ambition and underlying desire to eliminate the Jedi, so he decided to anoint him as Plagueis. As Bane taught almost everything he knew to Plagueis, the new Sith continued his involvement with the IGBC, as he developed the Damask traditions of gatherings at his new fortress. On one of these encounters, Plagueis would not only be joined by Bane, but also powerful figures such as Gardulla the Hutt. The Hutt had desires to take over Tatooine, and Plagueis agreed to help with the pod racing venture, which he knew would be massively profitable. But Bane was not done with Gardulla, and whilst he couldn't invade the mind of the Hutt, he could sense some of her recent interactions. Whilst Plagueis didn't want to risk the deal, Bane placed his lightsaber beside the neck of the Hutt and demanded to be taken to his fortress on Tatooine. A confused Plagueis followed his master as he choked Gardulla's Nikto guards and accosted the Hutt in his own ship. Once the Sith arrived outside of the fortress, they both sensed a powerful presence in the Force, and in the dungeons was Anakin Skywalker and his friends. Bane resumed his attack on Gardulla, altering the terms of the negotiation to include Anakin's freedom, but Gardulla hesitated. As the Sith were trying to break the Hutt, they didn't notice a shadow behind them. The Jedi Quinlan Vos had been undercover in Mos Espa and had heard about the disappearing children, so when he saw the ship of Gardulla, he knew the events were connected. Having made his way to the dungeons of the fortress, Vos managed to hide his shock at two Force users intimidating the Hutt, and immediately alerted the Jedi Council. The report from Voss shocked those on Coruscant, but with the distance between Coruscant and Tatooine, the Jedi had to find a faster solution. The answer was forced onto the Jedi when Voss saw Garjola's neck being sliced open by the Sith, and a mix of Nikto and Gamorrean guards rushed out into the hangar. Voss saw the Sith dragging a young boy, whom he saw from his time in Mos Espa, and he could now sense the boy was strong in the Force. Knowing the boy had to be freed before leaving the planet, Voss decides to leave the fortress in his ship and travel back to the heart of Mos Espa. As the settlement started to descend into panic, at the sight of Garjola's guards running towards them, the Jedi took advantage by taking the deactivation wand owned by Watto in his workshop. Then as the Sith made their expected journey to Mos Espa, Voss quietly hid in the shadows and watched Watto's workshop being set ablaze in anger. Through the flames, you would hear the voice of Shmi Skywalker and realise she was in immediate danger, not from the fire, but from the Sith. The Jedi used the Force to pull Shmi around the flames and into a safe location, before informing her of what had happened to Anakin and his ambitious plan. Voss knew that the Sith couldn't leave the planet, but he needed to stall time before the other Jedi could mount a rescue, so he and Shmi had to abandon Anakin for now and travel to a cave in the Jundland Wastes. Voss would regularly search the skies for the Sith's progress, and as they searched the sands, their time was running out. On the 10th day, Voss's patience had paid off when a small shielded vessel approached the coordinates given by the Jedi. Out stepped Master Windu and Plo Koon, surrounded by a clan of Jedi Knights, and even with the sand swirling around them, they could see the smoke rising from the Sith's destruction. The Jedi split into two groups, with Voss, Shmi and two Knights going to rescue Anakin, leaving the others to apprehend the Sith. As the strike team travelled to their landing zone, Windu could sense the nerves of his fellow Jedi, so he assured them that they should be confident, with both their strength in numbers and past history of defeating the Sith. As Windu finished his speech, the ship suddenly rocked, and at the front, the pilot was slumped over the controls. The Karoo Master ordered everyone to jump, and they quickly tumbled into the sands. As their ship crashed into a distant dune, the Jedi looked up from the bottom of the valley to find the Sith peering over them. Bane and Plagueis weaved their hands in a pattern, and the sand beneath the Jedi ascended like a cyclone, forcing the Jedi to leap onto the side of the sand dunes. As many of the Jedi struggled to climb the dunes, Mace Windu used Force speed to run up the dune, and with his purple lightsaber ignited, he charged at the Sith. Plagueis reacted by sending a force wave of sand, and the Jedi stumbled into a vaporator, before rolling to dodge a fire-orientated attack. Plo Koon soon climbed his dune to help Windu, using his own electric judgment to distract Bane, but this only angered the Sith Lord. As Bane prepared to burn the Keldor Master, the ship of Voss had returned from its rescue of Anakin, and the surviving Jedi made for a quick escape. Voss was finally able to deactivate the transmitter chips, and Anakin and Shmi were able to leave the torture of Tatooine. On their return to Coruscant, Windu presents the report of their rescue, and it was worse than the Council could have dared to imagine. Whilst the rumours of Bane's disappearance have faded over time, the hologram of the hooded man couldn't hide the distinctive scarred face of the fallen Jedi. As the Council dispatched scouts and investigators to trace Bane's previous steps, the Jedi were trying to identify the identity of Plagueis. The only clue they knew was that he was of the Millennialist species, so dispatched Jedi Master Dooku and Qui-Gon Jinn, despite Qui-Gon wanting to study Anakin. Under the pretense of organising a mining deal with the IGBC, the two Jedi are allowed through the blockade, and they are guided through to the city of Jygat and one of the IGBC's bases. Upon arrival, the Jedi are met by Car Damask, and as Dooku cleverly distracted the bankers, Qui-Gon transferred information from the central database. Unlike the efforts to track Bane, the Jedi and Mike Ito safely extract the data from the IGBC, and when examined back at the Jedi Temple, they discover a history of suspicious military fundings to Sith allies. The Council Tower is shaken by a sudden shock, and the Jedi look down to see the two Sith on Tatooine marching to the front gate. Leaving a pile of initiates in their wake, the Sith simply stopped. As Bane weaved a complicated pattern in the air, the pillars started to crumble, and Jedi were leaping out of windows in all directions, but they were bounced off of a force bubble generated by Plagueis. It was only when Grandmaster Yoda arrived could the Jedi stop their temple from being totally destroyed, but the Sith hurried inside. The Jedi were shocked and horrified to see them heading to the initiate clans, and Bane's cold and commanding voice demanding Anakin Skywalker be given to him. After moments of silence, the small footsteps of Anakin emerged from one of the doorways, But rather than fear, Bane sensed a grim determination. To the surprise of everyone, the astromech droids in the temple's hallways all activated as Anakin pressed a hidden switch in his robes, and smoke poured out into the temple. In the chaos, the Sith tried to grab Anakin, but the Jedi Council members apprehended the Sith and placed them in the detention center. The Council debated on the fate of the Sith, and using a method that had not been used in several millennia, they used their powers to sever the Sith from the Force, then gave them to the Republic. As the former Sith were tried for their crimes concerning the IGBC, the Jedi were busy rebuilding the temple, and the heroics of Anakin Skywalker were spread across the galaxy. The initiate was hailed as the chosen one, and away from the temple, he would be praised by senators and regents, until he met the Queen of Naboo.